Penn State hires Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles. So just to kind of paint the picture here for you a little bit. So Jim Knowles and Ohio State wins the national championship. And after they win the national championship, rumors are that Jim Knowles had contacted Oklahoma about potentially being their defensive coordinator. And then after the national championship, Jim Knowles contacts Penn State about possibly being their defensive coordinator. Jim Knowles seems to be upset and not happy at Ohio State, so he wants to move on. There are so many different rumors, so many different stories at this point. Just take everything with a grain of salt. Who knows what's true and who knows what's not? But he felt like Penn State was the right place for him. Obviously, they have a championship that they're going after next year, and it's also the state that he's from. So this kind of worked out together. And then also, when you get paid to be the highest paid coordinator in college football history, that might be a little enticing too. Who knows? But Zach, I want to first talk about Penn State and what this means for them, and then we'll talk about Ohio State. And then we'll talk about some of the rumors about Chip Kelly and stuff like that. So first, let's talk about Penn State. Like, to you, does this elevate your like Penn State in your mind at all? Like, is this going to impact your thought process going into Penn State as possibly a better favorite to win the Big Ten, a better favorite to win the national championship, or are you kind of like, Jim Knowles is a good coordinator, but they were going to get a good coordinator anyway. What's your thoughts?
I don't know, because like Penn State has had some mediocre offensive coordinators over the past couple years. They have not had mediocre defensive coordinators. Manny Diaz was great. Tom Allen, I thought, did a really good job.
Tom Allen
I
was very good this year, I felt like.
Yeah, I thought he was great. And I don't know. I think Jim Knowles at Ohio State was excellent, but he had some tendencies that were concerning. They struggled to adjust to the defense in year one, even with some good players. Jim Knowles really wanted the jack position to work. It didn't work. And after the Oregon game this past year, we saw some of the same reversions that we saw back in 2022 with some of the deep balls, exposing them, leaving their corners on islands. And that was exactly what he was told not to do in 2023. And so Ryan Day and Jim Knowles and I think Larry Johnson had a meeting after that Oregon game. It's like, we got to fix this. And I think where I come down to is how much of the defense was changed and was just the brainchild of Jim Knowles, and how much was it the players, how much was it Ryan Day getting involved, how much was it Larry Johnson. My point in that is I think a lot of Penn State fans are saying, all right, we're really loading up. And I would just say possibly, but there's room on the table for there to be some massive expectations that aren't met, because he wants to install his system his way. And if things don't work out, like, it could leave himself very vulnerable to big plays. And I think we saw that, like, everybody's saying November 1st. Do you think Jeremiah Smith's not going to expose any weaknesses in that defense? Like, that's going to be a really tough challenge. And I think they also get Oregon at home. He's going to have a tough road to hoe. And I am just not sure that transforming Penn State's system into his in year one is like a definite. It could be. They have really good personnel. Like, so it's not like they don't have any personnel. Certainly they have quite a bit. But I'm not sure it's like the grand slam. I think it might be a double that turns into a home run, but I'm not convinced yet.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a grand slam, but I really like it. Like, I
Oh
think
yeah,
if
yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
Penn State and you were thinking like, okay, who are we going to bring in as our defensive coordinator? Like, you just went out and got the defensive coordinator that won the national championship and
Mm-hmm.
was a big reason why. Now, there's all those kind of different stories behind the scenes of like, Ryan Day and him didn't get along and the defensive line and everything else. Like, there's all those stories, and I think you and I talked about those at one point after. I think it was after the Oregon game we talked about that, but like as far as I'm concerned, I mean, Tom Allen runs a similar defense to what Jim Knowles runs. Obviously, every coach has their own different kind of wrinkles and stuff like that. Tom Allen, likes to deploy the jack position at times, which is kind of like a, not just a, hands in the dirt lineman, but also somebody that stands up. If you saw it this season, you saw Jack Sawyer do that. So even though they may not have had like the true jack position at Ohio State, they did utilize that position at times with Jack Sawyer this season. And so for me, like the way I look at it, if you're Penn State, you couldn't have done any better. And this is
Yep.
what you needed to do. So is it a grand slam? Is it gonna, definitely bring them a national championship? I mean, probably not, but it's the best you could possibly do. And if you're James
Mm-hmm.
Franklin, you went out and did the best you possibly could do. So for
Yep.
me, I think it's spectacular for Penn State. I don't know if it moves them up to like number one for me. I still have some questions about, wide receiver. And as much as I do think that Drew Aller is going to improve next year, he did have a really tough game to end the season against Notre
Mm-hmm.
Dame, especially in those final moments. So, what are they going to do? Is Andy Kotelnicki going to stick with the run game when it's working better? There could be some different stuff there. I look forward to when Penn State guy and those guys are in PSU gym when they are in the chat again, so that way they can kind of give their thoughts as well. But as far
Mm-hmm.
as I'm concerned, you know, it was the best thing that they could do, but I
Yep.
don't know if like defense has never been the problem at Penn State.
Yeah.
You know,
I I think to that point, and Philip was asking, is Knowles is only great when at OSU? No, no, I don't think that at all. I I think it's a very I would agree actually. It's the best they could do. Absolutely the best they could do. I'm just not sure how I think you want to have sober-minded expectations going into next year as you're installing a completely new defense. And like I think we saw growing pains at Ohio State with Jim Knowles in year one. And that's maybe my one caution. But I think the second, you just alluded to it, the problem at Penn State has not been defense. And so, like, great, they got a great defensive coordinator. I think he's at least a double, if not a triple, if not a home run.
they've had a great defensive coordinator the past 4 years.
Yeah, like, great. What are you going to do for offense? They need a stud receiver, and like I think Hudson is, I think Hudson's good. I'm not sure he's much better than what they've had,
We'll see if they can
but
develop him. That's
yeah.
going to be a big piece of it. But yeah, no, I think obviously I don't think you're saying that Knowles was only good at OSU. I didn't take that away from what you were saying, but I would say I don't think it's going to take 3 years for Jim Knowles to install his defense at Penn
No,
State
no, no, no.
because it was similar to Tom Allen and kind of what he ran. So I do think that that could be expedited a little bit more. But you are correct when you're installing new stuff from a different coordinator, different wrinkles, stuff like that. It can be something that takes a little while. That was one of the advantages that Ohio State had this year on defense was they had the same defensive coordinator for 3 years in a row, and a lot of these guys that were starting this year, they started the last 2 years as well. So
Mm-hmm.
they had that going for them. So let's talk about this for Ohio State now. Okay, so Ohio State loses Jim Knowles. They're most likely, um, I mean, I posted about it on Twitter today. They're most likely going to make Matt Guerrieri their next defensive coordinator. He's their safeties coach. They could go out and look at a Jeff Hafley. Phil Parker is another name that's been mentioned. The Indiana defensive coordinator Bryant Haynes, he was mentioned, but he just got a contract extension, as John pointed out in the chat at Indiana today. So that's huge. Looks like he's not going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, does this give you pause? Does this give you concern for Ohio State next year, uh, Zach? I mean, because one of the things I pointed out with why I thought they should be number one is because they were bringing a lot of stuff back, including both coordinators. That's not happening now.
Yep.
Possibly not going to bring back either coordinator. We'll talk about Chip Kelly here in a second, but like, does this impact Ohio State next year at all for you? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, but not. I think the biggest way it impacts Ohio State is how much it forces Ryan Day to kind of remove himself from that CEO role. That's my biggest concern, especially like if Chip Kelly moves on. I think that's a bigger deal than Jim Knowles. And not because Jim Knowles isn't great, but I like if Chip Kelly moves on, he's got to find an offensive coordinator that he trusts. I think I think that's the big thing here is does he hire someone that he can trust to run the defense and that he doesn't have to be more and more involved? That's I think the key. So like if you really trust Matt Guerrieri and he's competent, like maybe let him grow. But I would make sure whoever you hire, Ryan Day has to trust that guy. He has to like working with him and he has to feel like he doesn't have to micromanage him and he has to feel like he can hold him accountable when he needs to. Like those are all non-negotiables. So it may mean you actually find a less qualified guy to make sure that you trust him and that you like that you're able to let him do his thing and hold him accountable when you need to.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the issue with Jim Knowles and Ryan Day at times was that Ryan Day wanted things to change, but Jim Knowles was kind of, I don't know if stubborn is the right word, but he wanted to do things the way he wanted to do them, which if you hire a defensive coordinator, you should let them do things the way that they want to do them as far as I'm concerned. But if Jim Knowles felt like he wasn't able to implement his entire defense and do everything he wanted to do, by all means, move on. So if I'm Ryan Day, though, like I like it that Ryan Day is getting involved in every area. He's not just involved on offense, but he's trying to do everything in every area. But at the same time, it's like you also got to be careful, Ryan Day. Like if you hire these guys, you got to let these guys do their work, right? I know this is not exactly the same, but and Michigan fans might get mad at me for it. That's fine if you do. I see some similarities. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but I see some similarities. Mike Macdonald came to Michigan, implemented the Ravens system, that style of defense, and then when he went off to, I think he went off to the Ravens. You brought in Jesse Minter, who was kind of like a younger version of Mike Macdonald, and he kind of had the same system and kept perfecting it and did a better job as a younger guy. I don't know if he did. I guess I don't know if he did a better job. He was there when the system was there for longer, so I think he benefited from that. I don't know how Michigan fans would feel like on if one was better than the other. They were both very good. It doesn't need to be one better than the other. But as far as I'm concerned, like you could get something like that with Matt Guerrieri coming in, right? Somebody who's maybe a little bit more innovative, maybe somebody who is a little bit younger, a little bit more lively, who can work on that kind of stuff, similar to how Jesse Minter did off of Mike Macdonald's system. Again, not exactly the same thing. Don't come at me, but I'm just saying there is a similarity there. Joe answered for Billy Tuesday. I apologize, Billy Tuesday. I saw your question and I forgot to say something about it when we were on Penn State. Billy asked why Tom Allen went. JR says Tom's daughter lives in Carolina. It was a major reason he went to Clemson. Yes, I also think that like the whole culture of Clemson and everything like that, I don't think there's any secret. Like it's a very Christian society there. Tom Allen upholds to that. If you followed him at all at Indiana, very much so. LEO, love each other kind of stuff, and he was very much so into that. And so I think that Clemson fits maybe that culture a little bit more. And then also he's very good friends with the offensive line coach. They knew each other from back at Ole Miss, and I heard that impacted things as well. So there's a reason why we went off on Minnesota losing Corey Heatherman, to Miami, and we didn't so much go off on Penn State losing Tom Allen to Clemson because they were for two completely different reasons, in my opinion. But yeah. Yep. So, all right, last thing, Chip Kelly at Ohio State, offensive coordinator. Don't even know how much we can really say about this right now, just because it is mostly smoke and rumors and stuff like that. But if Chip Kelly did say go to the NFL, somewhere. The Texans and the Jaguars are both pursuing him right now. Looks like he is a favored candidate for both those jobs. If Ohio State did lose Chip Kelly, Zach, are you at like panic mode for Ohio State? What's your thoughts there?
I don't know if I'm at panic mode, but I'm more concerned about that one for sure. I'll give a silver. We're not getting Saban. We're
There you
not
go,
getting
Billy. Get
Saban.
Saban. Go buy him out of his ESPN contract.
Yeah. Do you think he wants to deal with the lunatic fringe at Ohio State? No, thanks. The way he's talked about them. Yeah, no, that's not happening. I think the one silver lining, not that there's a silver lining, but if there is a silver lining, Ryan Day jumped back in to some of the play design and play calling at the end of the CFP run. And it was much more pass heavy, especially early, which I think then opened up the running lanes. I think when Chip Kelly came, I think a lot of people assumed that the running game would be the most dynamic it's been since 2019. It was not. Like, even with two stud backs, and part of that
It was when the offensive line was healthy.
Yeah, but even yeah, you're right. I just wonder if Ryan Day, if Chip Kelly would leave, would go back to a more pass heavy scheme. But I wonder if, and Billy Tuesday just hit the nail on the head. Like, I wonder if Chip Kelly is like, I hate recruiting. I don't want to do this. Go to the NFL. Just do ball. Whereas, like, I think Ryan Day actually really loves recruiting. And I think there are other guys in this industry that love recruiting as well as ball. And I think he could get an offensive coordinator to work for him. That would be suitable.
Yeah, I mean, he'll definitely be able to get somebody there, if nothing else. Like I said, the same thing about the defense. You got the best defensive player in the country, and Caleb Downs on defense. You've got probably the best, if not one of the best, offensive players in the country that doesn't play quarterback, and Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. So why would you not want to go to Ohio State and have that kind of playmaker ability and all that kind of stuff at your disposal? So as far as I'm concerned, they're going to find somebody, but it does, like you talked about with Jim Knowles going to Penn State, like that just is more to install, that is more to get used to, more for the players to kind of be updated on and stuff like that. So it's an interesting thing.